Dzień dobry Państwu.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
Chciałabym przedstawić Państwu
I'd like to present to you
zbiorów audiowizualnych archiwum.
the audio and video collection of the archive.
Na zbiory audiowizualne archiwum składają się zbiory
There
filmowe i zbiory
is a film
dźwiękowe.
collection and a sound
Tematyka tych
collection.
materiałów
The
obejmuje
subject
fragmenty II
of
wojny
those
światowej,
concerns the Second World War, with a special focus on all the aspects concerning the history of the Auschwitz camp. The film collection contains over 2,000 items, and they have a total duration of over 2,300 hours. A quarter of these films are productions by the museum itself. Documentaries form the largest part of the collection, more than 1,300 titles. The collection includes also several dozen feature films, over 500 video testimonies, and own recordings produced by the museum, visits of governmental delegations and representatives, opening of exhibitions, anniversary ceremonies, conferences, meetings with former prisoners, guide training sessions, and thematic sessions of the International Center for Education about Auschwitz and the Holocaust. The origins of the museum's collection date back to 1957, when the archives were established as a separate organizational unit. Alongside original camp documents, photographs, and negatives, copies of the Camp Liberation Chronicle were added, forming the nucleus of the film collection. The film premiered in Moscow on 28th May 1945, and beginning with the end of May that year, the film was distributed in Moscow cinemas. It was entitled Auschwitz, documentary films of the atrocities committed by the German government. The film was also shown during the Nuremberg trials as evidence against the officials of the Third Reich. Apart from the liberation of Majdanek and camps in Germany, completed by British and American soldiers. In the museum, that chronicle was presented to visitors beginning with the 1st of April 1957 in an 18-minute version entitled Auschwitz Documentary Films of German Crimes in Auschwitz. And it was presented until 1990, when changes were introduced to the commentary, reflecting years of research on the number of victims and the national composition of the prisoners. Some sequences were also omitted, and that was presented under the title Auschwitz until 2019. In 2020, as part of the project of increasing access to cultural resources, a new 8-minute film was produced for visitors. It contains parts of the original chronicle, camp photographs, and current footage of the museum grounds using the latest visual techniques. Some of the unique materials in the film collection include an amateur 30 seconds black and white shot on 8mm film by engineer Jindrich Kremer. This brief picture shows the evacuation transport of Auschwitz inmates through Kolin station near Prague on 25th January 1945, by now the only existing film footage showing the railway evacuation of Auschwitz inmates. The rights to this material are currently held by Kremer's relatives in Ostrava. Very important materials in our film archive are Polska Kronika Filmowa materials from 1945 to 60, the earliest documents the visit of a British delegation on 29th May 1945 under the Dean of Canterbury Cathedral, Dr. Hewlett Johnson, accompanied by Professor Jan Sen, who was the persecutor in Poland, and those members of the Sonderkommando. They inspected the ruins of Crematorium 5. The subject of Auschwitz was part of the Cold War and the political prevailing narrative. The meetings could gather tens of thousands of participants. The commentary defined Auschwitz as a place of martyrdom for hundreds of thousands of patriots, and prisoners were referred to as martyrs for the cause of freedom or victims of fascism. The films condemned imperialism and warned that there should be no more Auschwitzes here in Korea or in Greece. Documentary films produced by Poles and Germans dominate in the film collection. Then come the films from American and British producers, followed by the French ones. The collection is open and it's constantly growing. Since 1990, the main method of acquiring films are donations from national and international producers who have filmed at the museum all films or parts. After the completion, they provide material to us, agreeing to have it used for statutory and also educational purposes. At the moment, the film collection includes around 70 feature films, of which 30 concern Auschwitz. The first film shot on the grounds is The Last Stage, which premiered in March 1948. It was directed by Wanda Jakubowska. She was also a co-screen author, a former Auschwitz inmate. It was a success of Polish cinema, and it won the prestigious Crystal Globe. Today, it is a classic of the film art. Despite its propagandist message, it is really important due to original scenery. The footage was shot in 1947 when Birkenau camp had not been altered by natural development of greenery. It received also a prize in 2020 at International Focal Award. There were many Polish and international productions filmed on the grounds of the former camp because the authentic setting added to the value of the films. There were often hundreds of extras on set. So midway through the 1980s, there were some vocal oppositions to have films made in the camp, and it was disorganizing the museum and also damaging peace. So beginning with early 1990s, only documentaries and those addressing current events have been allowed to be filmed on museum grounds.
Schindler's List was one of the first films whose producers did not get the consent for shooting the film in the camp. That is why there were special sceneries built and there was some mistake. For example, train running in the opposite direction, but the viewers did not realize it. An important collection is also the video recollections, and these collections have more than 500 items, and the majority were shot by the museum, whereas the rest is the private individual collections. Many of them were shot by the staff members of the museum. These are, for example, the in-field interviews with, for example, commando members or people employed in the Gestapo offices. Also, the earliest items are the interviews with a young prisoner, Nathan Leitzinger, who arrived at Auschwitz in August 1943, and also some Roma survivors, Edward Hanstein and Herbert Alder. They were held outdoors in the quarantine section for Roma prisoners. Another group of elements, These are collections with 200 testimonies of the survivors, with the total duration more than 400 hours. This project was initiated by the International Center for Education about Auschwitz, and it was carried out between 2006 and 2011. These interviews were followed a structured format, covering the pre-war life, childhood education, and also the period of occupation and the stay in the camp, and also the post-war life. Every interview has a message for the younger generation at the end. What about the sound collections? The sound archives have more than 2,000 items, and 600, almost 600 of them are the museum production. The testimonies are grouped in 3 collections, and apart from the testimonies, the sound archives have also archival recordings, Polish radio broadcasts and programs, reports, documentaries, musical poems, and also broadcasts of ceremonies and other types of recordings. The first sound testimonies were recorded in 1959. These are short interviews with the residents of the Łęki village, and they concerned the SS raid on Julian Dusik tavern after a failed escape of 4 prisoners. The interviews were held by the head of the archives, Mr. Tadeusz Iwaszko, and the museum director and former prisoner Kazimierz Smoleń. The interviews were also used in the documentary film titled Escaped, directed by Wiesław Kielar. Also, because of these gaps in the original camp documentation, these testimonies make up the very important element in the basic history of the camp. And also they are really professional, and these the questions were really detailed, concentrating on the actual experiences. They referred to the period between 1939 and 1945, and these accounts were then written down and included in a group of testimonies, and now they are studies. Another group is the Katowice Depository Collection, which is a unique set of sound testimonies recorded by Polish radio journalists between 1985 and 1999. This was the project that was supervised by Mr. Jan Południak, the editor-in-chief of Polish radio in Katowice, and it was a nationwide initiative involving the central station in Katowice and 17 regional stations. About 17 journalists conducted these interviews, and there was also more than 830 testimonies in close collaboration with the former prisoners. Apart from the above named collections, also we have the sound accounts given to us by other institutions and also by individuals. These collections include, for example, a recording of the testimonies of Rudolf Hess, the commander of the camp, during the International Military Tribunal trial in Nuremberg, where he was testifying as a witness. And also, these recordings have his testimonies in front of the Supreme National Tribunal in Warsaw, where he acted as the defendant in 1947. And also it was the archives of the mechanical documentation in Warsaw. Also, the archive recordings have the testimonies of former prisoners during a session of district court in Katowice, which acted on behalf of the regional court in Frankfurt during the so-called Second Auschwitz trial. These testimonies concern Georg Egenschall, block Führer of Block 11, which was the death block, and also those who were recorded by concerning the capo, who was notorious for his cruelty. Also, the sound collection includes also about 70 musical recordings concerning Auschwitz and the Holocaust. These are literary musical performances, instrumental pieces, and camp songs. Also, it has pieces created for some anniversaries or to commemorate the victims of the Auschwitz camp. Apart from the publications, the sound collections have unique recordings of songs and musical pieces performed by former prisoners. For example, the piece from 1941, Henryk Król, Arbeitslagermarsch, which was performed by Górnicza Philharmonic Orchestra in Zabrze in 1973, conducted by Henryk Król. It was the march, which was played during drill, such as Im Lager, Auer, Ich war. Also, these were official songs, which are the part of the drink, which were sung by the prisoners forced to sing, which was the pretext for additional cruelty for those who were unable to repeat the German word. Also, there are some songs in which former prisoners sing unofficial songs, sung clandestinely to the tunes of popular pre-war hits, which comic or even trivial elements of the camp life, which was a form of resistance and also an attempt to survive. And the third part of my presentation will concern the preservation of audiovisual materials. For example, for the traditional materials on magnetic tapes, on VHS and HVHS tapes, and audio materials are recorded on magnetic materials and also reel-to-reel tapes and cassette tapes, and also many of them were converted to digital formats and stored on CDs and DVDs, and also as digital files, which were then secured in museum internal servers. These materials are kept under optimal conditions suited to the requirements, that is between 18 and 20 degrees centigrade, with humidity ranging between 35 and 40%. These parameters prevent the degradation of tapes and oxidation of coatings and substrates, and also they are kept by the service providers. The audiovisual collections have a wide applications in educational activities of the museums, providing illustrative and source materials for online lessons, and also they are shown in fragments during sessions, guide trainings, and in podcasts. They may be rendered available for the interested visitors upon appointment, and also they have a facilitated access with multi-level search by name. And this is the end of my presentation. Obviously, some elements were treated very briefly because of the limited time slot for my presentation. Should you have any questions, please send them to my email, which is displayed here on the screen.
Dzień dobry Państwu.
Good
Chciałem Państwu
afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
o
I would like
znaczeniu
to
archiwum
tell you about
cyfrowego,
the importance of
w
digital
odróżnieniu od tego, co słyszeliśmy
archives.
w
So, as
prezentacjach
opposed to
moich
some other
koleżanek.
archives discussed
Ja
in the
powiem o tej
contributions of my
cyfrowej
colleagues.
sferze pamięci.
So, I will discuss
To, co
the
odróżnia miejsca
digital
pamięci od innych
part.
muzeów,
What
jest to
differentiates
przede
the
wszystkim
memorial sites from other
koncentracja na człowieku.
museums
My tutaj
is the
wszelkie te dokumenty, tak
concentration
jak doktor
on
Agnieszka tutaj
humanity, on human
opowiadała,
beings. So, what was
miały
previously
znaczenia, gdyby
discussed
nie
would not be
dotyczyły
of any importance
tego miejsca
if
w
it did
kontekście
not concern the place
tego, co się tutaj
in the
wydarzyło, w
context
kontekście
of what
tego,
happened here. That
jakie
is
tutaj
within the
dokonano zbrodni.
context of the
I tak jak
crimes committed
tutaj
here.
Agnieszka
So, as
opowiadała,
Agnieszka already
większość z tej
mentioned,
dokumentacji, która
the
powstała w
majority
czasie
of
funkcjonowania
documents
obozu
created during the
została
operation of the
zniszczona,
camp
bo to około
was
95%
destroyed. Mostly
zostało tej
95%
dokumentacji
of
zniszczone.
documents was destroyed.
Dlatego
That
teraz
is
tak
why
trudno jest
now it is
nam
so
odtworzyć
difficult to
to, co
recreate
wydawałoby się
what
podstawowe, czyli
was of
pełną
basic
listę
importance, that is the
deportowanych
list
i więzionych
of
w
the
obozie
prisoners
Auschwitz.
kept
Te
in Auschwitz
dokumenty, które
camp.
tutaj
These
mamy zachowane,
documents,
dotyczą
which are
prawie
preserved
całości
here,
zarejestrowanych więźniów, czyli około 400 000.
concern the registered
Natomiast wiemy o
prisoners,
tym, że
about
Auschwitz-Birkenau pełni
40,000
rolę obozu zagłady
prisoners,
i
but it was
ponad
also the
900 000 według naszych szacunków
extermination camp,
ofiar, która tutaj
and
przybyła z transportów żydowskich,
many
nie zostali nic
victims
zarejestrowani,
of
tylko
the Jewish
zostali
transports were
zamordowani
never
krótko
registered,
po
but they
przybyciu
were
do
murdered
obozu.
immediately after
Nie mamy
their
żadnych list
arrival to the camp.
transportowych,
There are no
dlatego
transportation
współpraca
lists.
i
That is
szukanie
why the
informacji
collaboration
we
and
wszelkich
looking
możliwych miejscach jest
for
tutaj
information
bardzo ważne.
is really very
Mamy teren
important.
oczywiście, który
So
w
we
dużym stopniu
have
zachował się
the
w
territory
takim
which was
kształcie
preserved in more
oryginalnym
or less
i
original shape.
w poprzedniej,
So in
sesji,
the
czy jeszcze
previous
w kolejnych sesjach
sessions or
słyszymy o
in
tym,
the
jak
next sessions, we are
konserwacja
going
właśnie
to hear
terenu
that the
też
conservation
tutaj
of the area was
spełnia rolę zachowania
also
tego
performed
autentyzmu.
the
W
role of
kontekście archiwum
preserving the
cyfrowego również
authenticity. Also, in the digital
zachowane
archives,
obiekty,
we have the
ich
photographs
digitalizacja ma
of the
znaczenie.
objects
Także
that are preserved.
całościowe spojrzenie
So,
na archiwum cyfrowe w miejscu
this
pamięci,
also helps the
takie jak my
overall looks
staramy
for
się
the state of the
prezentować,
preserved objects.
zmierza ku temu, aby
So
wszystkie
this
możliwe
leads
ślady
to all
pozostawione
possible
tutaj w czasie funkcjonowania obozu
shapes that were
były poddane
preserved,
digitalizacji, dzięki której
all
będzie
objects
możliwość nie
were
tylko,
preserved
tak
and
jak pan
digitalized.
dyrektor
So, as the
wcześniej powiedział,
director mentioned,
że nie tylko
it
zachowujemy
is
je,
not
tworzymy jakąś
only
kopię
the
cyfrową, ale
preservation or making a digital
również w ten
copy,
sposób
but also
upamiętniamy,
we try to
i
commemorate in this way
odtwarzamy
and
dzieje
record
poszczególnych osób.
and represent the stories of individuals,
Słyszeliśmy
of
o
individual
zniszczeniach dokumentacji,
prisoners.
tak
We
mniej więcej
heard
jak ta
about
dokumentacja w obozie
the
powstawała.
destruction
Natomiast
of the
tutaj
documents,
jest
of
to, co
the
zostało wyzwolone
files, and this is
wyzwolenia
what
obozu,
has
to
been found
jest teraz
after the
częścią
liberation of the camp,
naszego archiwum.
which
Jednak
now
wiemy,
makes
że
up a part of our
dokumentacja została
archives. We
bardzo
know that
rozproszona, to
the
co
documents were
doktor
dispersed
Kita
and
mówiła
scattered.
o
What Dr. Kita
Federacji
mentioned
Rosyjskiej, że tam
about
znajduje część
Russian
dokumentów, ale
Federation.
te dokumenty są
So
rozproszone
these
właściwie
documents
po całym
are
świecie, były
scattered all over the
czasami zabierane
world,
przez
and
więźniów, którzy
sometimes
zostali
they were
wyzwoleni,
even
potem
taken
przekazywane różnym
by the
instytucjom, więc są
prisoners
również te dokumenty w
who
Stanach
were
Zjednoczonych, listy
liberated.
transportowe
So some of the
znajdują się
documents
we
are
Francji,
kept, for
Belgii
example,
czy
in
w
the
Holandii.
US, in Belgium, France. And this image presents the documentation which has been preserved, and we see how incomplete it is. So 5 years of the camp's operation have the periods with very poor documentation, and also with reference to the majority of the victims, no documents have been preserved at all. So there is a large number of prisoners unknown to us by name. The operation of the digital archives, which were started at the beginning of the 1990s, initially it was supposed to be the digital copy of the analog archives, but the newly created text databases were believed to be equipped with these scans. These are the digital images of all the documents. So it means that the popularization by means of digital databases and digital archives is much easier. And what Dr. Kita mentioned in her contribution, thanks to digital images, we can present the copies instead of the originals, or instead of Xerox copies or photographical copies. Databases also play an important role. That is which is really important for the scholars and academics studying history. The majority of archival collections are digitalized, and more than 1 million personal entries are digitalized, and more than 2 million scans are also kept in these records, in these archives. So these digital items are all the time undergoing long-term storage procedures. So we know very well that, for example, in our own private collections, the photographs can leak, and, for example, the paper changes, and we have no possibilities to restore them. So the long-term storage data policy results in the fact that the digitalized documents and the databases created in the 1990s, they are still read out, they are still legible, they are still in use, and their quality is controlled on an ongoing basis so that the images could be legible in future as well. The documents are frequently in a very poor condition. For example, the paper that was used for the documents was also of very poor quality. So in some time, perhaps the digital images will be the only preserved copy of the image. Obviously, our conservation services are trying to prevent the effect of the time passage on the documentation, but it seems that these digital copies will help us to preserve the life of these documents.
What we can see is that the documents that are stored in the archive are, in majority of them at least, were handwritten. There is plenty of contextual information that is present here in the data. We also see information that results from specific documents. If these are, for example, hospital documents, we also obtain information about the diseases, diagnosis. Thus, there is quite a wealth of such documentation. All that information is stored. Not only are the birthdays, inmate numbers, but we have more detailed information. For example, diagnoses. They are written in German and in Latin, and all that information can be found in the databases. I'll just show how the platform that we're using currently operates. Our goal in this case is to have all the information that concerns one victim, one human being, is gathered at a single location. Here we have Stanisław Ryniak, who was the first political prisoner of the camp from the first transport. I'll show you what it looks like in our database, where after logging in, you can move to the victims database. That's all those who were deported, all those who were imprisoned in Auschwitz-Birkenau. You can look for information about Stanisław Ryniak here, and you will receive this whole information containing also information about the transport in which he arrived, the documents he was entered in, camp mugshot. That's where the document is combined with the human, but you also receive information about the transport, where they arrived from, how many of them were there. All this gives us a holistic picture of the fate of such a person in the camp. We have here all that information. Now let me show you how these documents from individual complexes, like Röntgen's book, for example, here. This is an entry on Stanisław Ryniak with precise information about document call signs. There's also the image of the document. At number 31, you can see this entry. The same scan is used to illustrate the data of other inmates who were entered on the same page. This is the transport roll from October 44. Ryniak was sent in transport to Light Berlitz. That's the information about this transport. Then there is this entry in Auschwitz I, Block 4, where Stanisław Ryniak was entered into that register. We can see the whole entry, which contains all the information that was accounted for, that was produced. Same with the book of the hospital block Auschwitz I, where Stanisław Ryniak stayed as a patient. And in this case, we also trying to make sure that all such documents, that those scans are connected to this textual information. We can see an entry here on Stanisław Ryniak. This is another hospital block, block number 20 in Auschwitz I. Another entry on Stanisław Ryniak. It's preserved here. That's the original document I'm showing you. That's the scan. So it's plentiful work that we continue to perform, so that those individual entries made in 3 decades of work here of our experts, so that all these were grouped within a single entry concerning one person. We also have camps photographs, about 40,000 of those. Sometimes these are just numbers. We don't know the names sometimes. In case of some inmates, those who were better known, earlier. Those who had been identified, they are identified in photographs. We can see them. This is a photograph of Stanisław Ryniak, for example. That's what Dr. Kmita mentioned about the organization of the archive itself. In this digital archive, we want to show the original order of the analog archive to, pass this organization one-to-one to individual Abteilungs, to individual sections, so that all these scans of original documents also contain information about the people that those records concern, and that they also contain information about inventory numbers, everything that the archivists need. That's Józef Cyrankiewicz, that's his personal entry. There are plenty of documents preserved for him, also exchange of letters. Some of those documents we only have in copies, some in digital copies, because sharing the scans, families often emphasize that they will retain the original. So now there is this digital archive that in many cases is richer than the original, because we have the copies of electronic matter whose originals we don't have in the archive. I also wanted to show you what other functions our platform retains. We have more than 590,000 entries of the inmates, of the persons deported. We can browse through this data in various ways. Look, Józef Maksymowicz here, for example, who was in a Mauthausen transport. So you can see here his personal record, personal card. One document here concerns precisely him. And there is also a scan where his name is entered. And that transport is connected to him, but also to other people who were brought in that transport. So this shows how those mutual relations between documents allow us to plunge into history, then recount the story of groups, of individuals. What 40 years ago seemed impossible now is just possible. We also have information here about more than 9,000 of the SS staff who at various points in time served in the camp, but we still focus on the victims because there's a lot to be done in that aspect as well. As I said, transports are a separate database. There are more than 1,000 transports that we have recorded. We try to combine that information to people. Many of those were transit camps, ghettos, and other places from where inmates were transported or the deportees were taken from such places. As I've mentioned earlier, I have information about inventories, about those call signs, and that database offers us a complex, holistic picture. We can work with a document thanks to this, but is also very useful for everyone who specializes in archives. Now, perhaps an example. Sorry. I said that this data is quite scattered all around the world, actually. And now we've started cooperating with Memorial del Shoah, more than 80,000 transport lists to Auschwitz. And through a link, you'll be able to connect to that. Here we have original transport lists and sometimes even more information about those people. So we try not to centralize all the data, but rather to bring them together with other repositories that are actually gathered throughout the world, so that we don't copy all the data, so that we interlink the data, so that the people who will browse through it could have a holistic picture. That platform will be available soon. We'll try to make it available. You'll be able to log in and browse through the data just like I've shown it. I believe it's going to be a tool for more than just researchers. It will be available for many individuals interested in that tragic history who want to seek information about members of their families. I encourage contacting our archive, the digital repository, the Office for Information about Former Inmates. Will always try to answer your questions on individual deputies, for example. Thank you very much for your attention.
Dzień dobry. Ja natomiast dzisiaj chciałabym Państwu
Good
opowiedzieć
afternoon. I'd
o
like to tell you today about a
realizowanym
pilot
od
project
2018
conducted
roku
since
Biuro do Spraw
2018
Więźniów,
by
które
the
jest sekcją
Office for
archiwum.
Former Inmates,
Jednak na
which is
początku
a
warto
section
powiedzieć,
of the
czym faktycznie
archive.
zajmowało się i
Let's
czym
start
zajmuje
from
się
saying
biuro od
what
jego
that
powstania w
office
latach
has
60.
dealt with since it was incorporated in the 1960s.
Jego
Right.
najważniejszym zadaniem jest udzielanie
Its
informacji
key
rodzinom
information is to
przebywanym na
provide
obozach lub
information
badaczom
to
różnego typu, na
families,
przykład pobycie w
survivors,
obozie
scholars, and
Auschwitz w
researchers
konkretnym
about
osobie.
the
To tutaj
interment of
trafiały
specific
i wciąż
individuals in
trafiają zapytania
Auschwitz.
o szczegóły
We're
pobytu w
receiving
obozie byłych
questions,
więźniów.
queries
Pracownicy
concerning
biura
camp
przeprowadzają
experiences of
terendy,
former
bazując na
prisoners.
dokumentacji
The staff
przechowywanej na
run
nim. Tutaj
queries
pamiętamy,
based
że
on
jest to mniej niż
documentation
10%
stored here.
dokumenty osób, które
Let's remember
przetrwały
that
II
it's
wojnę
under
światową.
10% of the
Są one
documentation
zachowane
that's
u
survived,
nas w formie
and
dwóch,
it's
2 milionów
preserved
kart
here
katalogowych
as
stworzonych
2
na podstawie
million
dokumentacji.
catalog
Są one
sheets
uporządkowane
based on
zarówno
documentation
alfabetycznie, jak i
ordered
numerowo
both
oraz na
alphabetically and
materiałach
by
zebranych po
number
zakończeniu wojny,
and
jak
on
ankiety, relacje
materials
oraz
gathered
dodatkowych
after the
opracowania
war
historycznych.
and
Tutaj,
additional
pomimo faktu, iż
historical
wiemy, że
uh,
nigdy nie uda nam się
material.
odtworzyć
We
nazwiska
know we
każdej
will
osoby, która
never be
trafiła do
able
obozu, w nim
to
przebywała i
recreate
zginęła,
all the names of people
pracownicy biura
who
zdawali sobie sprawę,
were
iż
in the
istnieje
camp, who
duży
died
procent
here, who
dokumentacji
lived
odnośnie
here.
więźniów obozu,
We know
które są w
that
stanie tak
there is
naprawdę
plentiful
stworzyć.
documentation that
To
can
tutaj
be
pojawił się pomysł
really
na projekt
recreated.
polegający na
That's where the
odszukywaniu więźniów
idea of a
Auschwitz w
project was
dokumentach innych
born,
obozów.
to
Otóż
look
jeżeli zdamy sobie
for
sprawę z
Auschwitz
faktu, iż
inmates
więźniowie
in
byli
documents of
przenoszeni
other
często
camps.
niejednokrotnie pomiędzy
Once we
różnymi
realized that they were transferred
koncentracyjnymi,
from
a ten
camp to
fakt
camp,
był odnotowywany w
and the fact
dokumentacji w
was
różnych
always
obozach,
recorded
to
in
rodzi
the
nam się szansa na
documentation,
odtworzenie
we
historii.
find an
I ten właśnie
opportunity to
wykres, który widzimy teraz na
recreate history.
prezentacji,
The
to ilość
chart we see
przeniesionych
on the
więźniów obozu
presentation
Auschwitz do
are the
innych poszczególnych
numbers
obozów.
of
I te
Auschwitz
dane
inmates
pochodzą z
transferred to
początkowej
other
kwerendy
camps.
przeprowadzonej w ramach
That's the
projektu.
data from the
I
original
całkowitą
query conducted,
liczbę więźniów przeniesionych
and
do
the
innych
total
obozów
number
szacuje się na
of
około
inmates transferred
213 tysięcy
is
osób, przy
estimated
czym
at around
największa ilość z nich trafiła
213,000
do KL
people.
Mauthausen, są to
Most of them reached
2952
KL
osoby, oraz do obozu
Mauthausen
KL Buchenwald
and
28
KL Buchenwald
101 osoby.
28,103. individuals. Mauthausen, 32,952. In 2018, the Auschwitz-Birkenau Museum and Arolsen Archives, International Tracing Service Archives in Bad Arolsen, started working together on restoration of personal data of those imprisoned in Auschwitz. As a result, staff of the Office for Former Prisoners gained remote access to the Arolsen archives and the possibility to copy documents deemed of particular significance to our collection. This is how the project entitled Restoring the Identity of the Deported and Imprisoned in KAL Auschwitz was started and ran from 2018 to 2022. Its results and discoveries are still used by us in planning the activities of our office. The project was broken into 5 modules, which contains separate, however, interconnected tasks. The first module is a query in the archives and obtaining documents of those inmates. Module 2, chronology of transport. 3 is indexation, and module number 4 is reconstructing documentation, and the 5th is shared memory. The first module, researching archives and obtaining documents, is the foundation. Thanks to the remote access, you first needed to decide which documents, the documents of which camps we're going to focus on. The previous slide shows that most shifts were to KL Buchenwald and Mauthausen. That information was obtained from transport lists in a lot of lists, Zugangslist, Veranmeldung, and we search for personal documents on the personal cards of the inmates, personal Bogen, and effective Verzeichnis. On the left-hand side of a slide, you can see a transport list with a note indicating the prisoners who came from Auschwitz. On the right, there is one of the personal effects. That's the effective Verzeichnis, which has a note about transfer to Auschwitz on the 14th of May 44, but next to it, at the top margin, there is also the number of that person in Auschwitz. In the first stage of the project, we worked on the documents from KL Buchenwald. We received those from Arolsen in the second phase, running from 2021 to 2022, on documents from KL Mauthausen, which we earlier received as digital copies from Yad Vashem Institute. The following slides show the photographs of inmates obtained, made in Buchenwald, but concern inmates who were in Buchenwald. Photographs of Jews deported from Hungary, young ones, and also French political inmates. After the completion of a project, we can boast that now we have 130 new documents. These are the German names from Buchenwald, and more than 42,000 are documents of Häftling's personal Bogen from KL Mauthausen on people who had previously been inmates at Auschwitz. In the second module, our project started when we realized the scale of the new or partially new information which we managed to reach thanks to the query we conducted. Thanks to the information in the documents, we started working on the chronology of transports of Jews to KL Auschwitz, a subject that we had known precious little about earlier. Having developed this information, we realized that this gives us opportunity to work on nearly 90% of all transports to KL Auschwitz. That's how we started working on showing the mass and also geographic scale of transports. We're still working on an app that will show the path that the transports had to take to reach the camp. We will also from that app receive information whether this was male or female transport, how many people it concerned, and how many people were finally registered in the camp. The previous ones that were published will also make their way into the application.
This also concerned a list of transported persons, which will be later on available on the museum website. Concerning the indexation, which also refers to the activities of digital repository, now we have a significant number of documents and we had to face it. That is why we created the third module. As I already said, our archives went through a lengthy process of digitalization, and during that project we decided to use the new platform Memorial Archives, and it was developed by Johannes Ibel and Maximil Kalus and Flossenberg Memorial. Thanks to this, we work not only on the indexation of documents, but also we try to transfer the entire digitalized collection and also the very query into the platform. And now I would like to show it to you. The documents, like in the analog collections, are divided into the same section. But what is unique is the creation of a golden record, a prisoner profile for each Auschwitz inmate, and we used it on the basis of the documents concerning a specific prisoner. Also, the platform helps to search information because we will be able to look for more extensive information, not only name, last name, and the prisoner number. So also this will help us to find on the basis of the date of transportation, gender, place of birth, and the camp number. And this is, for example, the profile of Mr. Chowaniec. His documents were obtained as part of the project, and they were connected with those kept by our archives. The reconstruction of the documentation. So as we processed an increasing number of new documents, we started to notice some patterns. And I'm going to present an example. So, for example, while researching the prisoners transferred from Auschwitz to Buchenwald, we so it was like post-Eingang and post-Ausgang. So during that work, we saw a cross-out reverse side of a document. So on the basis of this data presented on the reverse side, for example, Szmul Czarnobrody, we realized that he was the Auschwitz prisoner then sent to Chowaniec subcamp, and after the transfer, his documents were crossed out, and this reverse was used as the others, and then he was sent to Buchenwald in 1945. So thanks to the analysis of the documents, we were able to identify 504 prisoners who were transferred to the subcamp in Chowaniec. And here we can see the last module of the works, that is the educational insight. And we would like to show to the persons who are interested, and students and pupils would like to show how interesting the documents are. The people who are interested were given the opportunity to transcribe and index documents on the platform. We, at the same time, we wanted to give them as much information as possible about the archive, about the camp's history, and about the study of documents. Thanks to the work with personal records, students and volunteers could feel closer to the victims and help to commemorate them. Between 2021 and 2023, more than 100 volunteers and interns worked with us. They worked remotely or on site. for
czasami kilku
periods
miesięcy,
ranging from
czasami nawet
several weeks
roku,
to several
a wielu z
months,
nich
even a
nawet po
year.
zakończeniu
And
krótkiego
some
okresu
of them
współpracy
continued
wciąż pozostają z nami w
working
kontakcie i wykonują
with us
pracę
even
na rzecz
longer,
projektu.
staying in
Ich
touch with
praca
us for the
realnie wpłynęła
project.
na działania
Their work
projektu, z czego
had a
jesteśmy
real
naprawdę
impact
bardzo
on the
dumni.
project, and
Tutaj
we
na
are very
slajdzie widzimy
grateful and
jedną z
proud
tłumaczeń
for it.
wykonanych
And this
na,
is one of
przez
the
uczennicę Julię Styczeń w ramach
translation
wolontariatu. Jest to opis
of the
transportu
documents
ze
made by
strefy
Julia
krakowskiego.
Styczeń, which is the description of transport from
I
Krakow
w ramach
district.
zakończenia
And
realizacja
to close, I
projektu
would like to
przywracania
say that the
tożsamości
execution of
deportowanych
the
i więzionych
project
w celi
restoring
Auschwitz,
the identity
oprócz
of people
pozyskanych
deported
dokumentów
and
odtworzonych
imprisoned in
tożsamości
Auschwitz,
więźniów oraz
apart
uzupełnienia
from
ich
the
losów, pokazała
reconstruction
nam,
of
że
their
prowadzenie
identity,
dalszych prac w tym
has
kierunku na
shown
szeroką
that
skalę jest
it is
konieczne.
necessary to
Pomimo
carry
czasu,
out
który
more
upłynął
work
od
on it.
zakończenia wojny,
In
niekończącej
spite
się
of the
pracy
time
historyków i
passage
archiwistów,
since the
my
war,
wciąż jesteśmy
the efforts of
w stanie
historian
odkrywać
and
nowe
archivists, we
informacje
are
i
still
korygować
able
te
to
nieprecyzyjne.
uncover new
Współpraca z innymi
information.
instytucjami
The
umożliwiła
cooperation
nam
with
analizę
other
porównawczą
institutions
dokumentów
allowed us to
znajdujących się w
compare
posiadaniu muzeum
the
z tymi
analysis of the
pozyskanymi,
documents that
aby
we had
kontynuować
and
i
that they
rozszerzać
had
pracę
to
rozpoczęte w
continue
projekcie.
and
W
expand
2023
the
roku
work.
muzeum
In
został powołany zespół
2023, the
zadaniowy do
museum
spraw
created a
integracji danych
task
i
for the
informacji o
integration of
ofiarach KR
data
Auschwitz,
and
składający
information
się z
on
pracowników
Auschwitz victims,
Biura do Spraw Byłych
comprising
Więźniów oraz
the Office
repozytorium
for
CK.
Permanent Prisoners
Obecnie
and Digital
zespół
Repository.
kontynuuje analizę
This
dokumentów w
team
celu dalszego
is
przywracania tożsamości.
carrying further
Zespół również
analysis of
opracowuje bazy
documents,
danych na
trying to
podstawie
restore the
pozyskanych materiałów w
identities of
połączeniu ze
those
zbiorami
who
już
were
posiadanymi w
deported
muzeum
and imprisoned
oraz
in
pracuje nad
Auschwitz, and
narzędziami
also
ich
works
najlepszego
on the tools
udostępniania.
for the
Tutaj
best
bardzo
share
chciałabym
of
podziękować
this
za uwagę.
information in public. And this is all from me.
Bardzo
Thank you very
dziękuję
much for your
wszystkim
attention.
prelegentom
Thank you
za
very much. I would like
interesujące
to thank
wystąpienia.
all the speakers
One
for
pokazały taki
interesting
szeroki zakres
contributions,
funkcjonowania
and
archiwum,
they showed
w
the
tym
wide
gromadzenia
scope of
rozproszonej po całym
functioning the
świecie
archive
dokumentacji
and
dotyczącej
also about
światopozu
the
Auschwitz. Jeszcze raz bardzo Państwu
documentation
dziękuję.
concerning the
Natomiast
former
Państwa
prisoners. I would
zapraszam
like
na
to
krótką
invite you
przerwę
for a
i
short
spotykamy się
break,
ponownie o
and
godzinie
we're going
18.
to reconvene at 6 o'clock. Thank you very much for your attention.